Good morning. My name is Marta Brocki with ARC Solutions. Today I'll be sharing findings from a recent assessment focused on integration of wildlife considerations into transportation processes across the Northern Appalachians. This is a project that was undertaken by ARC for the Nature Conservancy. And I'd also like to acknowledge Alissa Fadden, who was the lead on this project at TNC, and also Renee, Callahan, and Angie Kachelik, who co-led this work as well. There we go. So this project was really motivated by the recognition that the Appalachians are among the most globally important regions for addressing climate change and for conserving biodiversity. And as part of its broader goals, TNC seeks to work towards a fully functional, resilient, and connected Appalachian landscape. Connectivity for wildlife across roads is just one piece of this puzzle, but that's the area that we focused our inquiry on. So the geographic scope for this project was 8 northeastern states, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. And the project really set out to answer how and when states are integrating wildlife considerations into transportation, what context-sensitive actions are most likely to lead to successful integration, and what barriers the agencies are experiencing in this process. As part of our research, we did a literature review of existing transportation studies, state wildlife action plans, and long-range transportation plans. And we also conducted interviews with representatives at both of the state agencies. And this project was really motivated by a desire to articulate some of the unique variables that are informing mitigation of wildlife-road interactions in the Northeast, and to provide some context-specific kind of regional guidance to states that maybe don't always see themselves as part of the project and guidance that are tailored to the Western states. So to articulate some of the key differences that we heard, number one is that the population is more distributed in the East compared to the West. It's largely composed of private lands, has lower percentages of public land. Just for comparison, in 2018, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania had about 15 to 25% combined federal and state land, whereas in the Western states, we see more of 35 to 90%. The scale at which large-bodied wildlife moves is more one animal at a time rather than these larger migrations, so it's harder to determine whether connectivity is a population-level problem. And eastern states are also experiencing larger and more frequent flooding events, while the western states are experiencing more drought. And so the combination of these factors and a relatively earlier development history really means that the spatial extent of the transportation system in the Northeast has largely been met. We modeled our framework of the transportation process after some of the great work that Patty Kramer and her team did as part of the Wildlife and Transportation pooled fund study that concluded a year or two ago. So the core phases are long-range planning, state planning and research, the STIP, pre-construction, construction, and post-construction. And in our research, we added these bookend phases that we identified in training and education and also emergency relief. Some positive drivers of change that were observed by DOT and DOW staff. We interviewed people in each state. The average tenure was about 14 years, and some of the drivers that they've observed included more supportive policies, a stewardship culture developing at the agencies, related research, public-private partnerships, as well as increased media coverage of this topic. And so just to run through this kind of challenge opportunity puzzle that we've put together, the first kind of major opportunity is related to planning. There's limited knowledge of the full transportation process. Often staff aren't involved in the allocation of funding for research, even though this is a critical point at which these decisions are made. And also, long-range transportation planning is identified as a core phase in which wildlife considerations are integrated, but often environmental staff is not participating in this phase. With relation to species, It was really clear that there's very clear guidance around connectivity for aquatic species and also clear legislation that enables their integration. This is less the case for terrestrial species that lack equivalent kind of regulatory processes unless there is kind of a threatened or endangered species nexus. We heard from staff that road replacement rather than new road construction is kind of the standard way of integrating connectivity. The only exception is really logging roads, which is a category of roads that are still actively being developed in these states. And infrastructure resilience has really risen to the top as a key area for integration because it allows us to leverage funding dollars for multiple pots. And also when we upgrade structures to integrate larger hydrological flows, there are opportunities to integrate wildlife passage as part of those projects. And a really key category also is emergency relief. There are some limitations about how emergency funds can be used to replace. Often we have to replace like with like, but if we were to integrate wildlife connectivity as part of those projects, they could also lead to some significant cost savings. And finally, private land. The greater portion of private lands across the Northeast poses some challenges, especially with relation to land protection on either side of structures, but also exclusionary fencing, which is key to the success of connectivity projects. It's more often interrupted by driveways on private land, so a greater collaboration with private landowners is required in this context. And finally, funding. Our interviewees generally perceive that it's difficult to fund terrestrial mitigation projects, but that it's much easier to find funding for aquatic projects, and especially difficult to fund post-construction activities, such as monitoring and maintenance for structures. And with that, I think I'm at time. I'll leave you with some actions for Northeastern agencies as well as their partners to support this process more effectively. Thank you.
I have a question. Is this going to be released in a document soon?
Yes, so right now it's been submitted as internal guidance to the project lead. We are working on a public facing version that we hope to release shortly. Thank you.